Right, welcome back to another episode of Author Story, everyone. I am your host, Alexander Lim, and as a lot of you may already know, on each episode of Author Story, we speak to a different author on his or her particular topic of interest. So, on today's episode is Joseph Rain, the author of The Unfinished Book About Who We Are, Book 1, First Steps to Self-Discovery. And please feel free to check his book out right now via the Amazon link in the video description below. As for Joseph himself, he is an entrepreneur from London who has renounced any association with nationality, race, religion, or class, and instead considers himself to be a true citizen of the world faithful to only one religion, which is humanity. So, Joseph, welcome to Author Story. It's great to have you with us today.
Alex, hi. It's so great to be here with you today. Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So, Joseph, first off, what made you decide to write the unfinished book about who we are?
I've begun researching who we are at an early age of 15. I basically came down literally overnight with an excruciatingly painful illness to which doctors said there was no cure. Basically, they described it as some kind of a modern reaction to the chemicals. But what was actually happening, imagine this, just everything I sensed, thought, said, or did, my skin would just react violently as if somebody had poured boiling water over me. We don't actually realize, but everything we do, our body is reacting in the background, but you don't feel it. I felt everything. So it was literally, one of the doctors pulled me aside and he said, listen, you're 15 years old. This is not the end. It will get better as you get older.
Right.
But he advised me to go to the library. There was no internet those days yet.
Right.
Funny to think about that, but yes. And he said, start reading up on the power of the mind. So I did. And pretty much very quickly, I realized it wasn't the mind. It was the emotions that are working in the background. And, imagine not feeling anything. I mean, unless you're born Putin, I don't think you'll be very successful.
Right.
Every time we say something, there are, accompanying feelings in the background. And that's what was basically happening to me. But really, I didn't start writing, what was it, about 13 years later. That was in 1995 when my younger brother took his own life.
Ouch. Okay.
And yes, that was, I'm one of those people, especially through everything I learned from, I had like 13 years to just deliberate who I was. I was learning amazing things just because I really had to spend time with myself. And as my brother was getting into depression, I invited him over. And he stayed with me for the last couple of years. And we were just discussing, I was trying to convince him how amazing this life is. And he was just trying to convince me how just by dying, he will get rid of all the pain. And these were like some phenomenal discussions. And obviously, was it June the 2nd, 1995, he eventually managed to fool us all. Left a simple note, I will suffer no more. And suddenly he was gone, and there I was, I just had so many things to say. There was like these feelings of guilt, anger, and I just needed to get a release. And I remember one night, because I couldn't sleep for about 6 months, I just started writing, and I was writing about everything. And after a few years, I thought, I'm writing about love, I'm communicating with my brother. So I gave the book like a fancy title, a short book about love. And then some 15, 20 years later, I actually realized, I was actually writing about who we are, because what actually happened, discussing with my brother the meaning of life. Before I was just working out how to control your emotions, how we communicate with the environment and everything. As a result, I became successful very quickly. I mean, what we call success, I had cars, houses, whatever you wanted. And then when my brother took his own life, I started to research just about everything. I went into science, I went into philosophy, I went into spirituality, and on the way I also picked up religion. And eventually, as I said, after some 15, 20 years, I realized I'm writing about who we are.
Mm.
And it wasn't till I was about 40,
Hmm.
so about 10 years ago, that I was debating these things with everyone, and people start saying, "Listen, you really need to put something down,
Right.
like I don't know, that people can read."
Mm.
Which really started to make sense because as I was discussing with people, I mean, imagine I spent 40 years just researching. By then was about 25 years, and obviously people didn't have that kind of time, so
Right.
I needed to write things down. So I said, "Listen, read this, and then come and talk to me," because otherwise I was having to explain everything.
Hmm.
Some of my crazy theories about who we are, the world, and so forth.
Okay. And I noticed that the title of your book is Book One, so I guess there are more books along the way.
Yes, I actually written 5 books.
Oh,
The
okay.
fifth one is actually very, very hands-on, practical.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the first book which perhaps concentrates a lot more on the world.
Mm-hmm.
The second one will be going more within.
Mm-hmm.
And the first 2 books are essentially what I found as I expanded my knowledge and my understandings is that I needed to clarify a lot of things. So, really, book 1 and book 2 really take in a lot of the established wisdom that we have. I do introduce a lot of new concepts because we've invented some really big words like love, life, freedom,
Right.
and really we don't really understand what these words mean because we started to identify ourselves with the words. Like you say, for example, a tree. Oh, this is a tree. Well, it's not a tree. It's a word. A tree.
Mm-hmm.
What we should be actually saying, Alex, is we call it a tree because
Mm.
if you look at a tree, it's this amazing network of amazing things all working together to form this incredible thing that is actually a tree. And yeah, I basically found out that a lot of things need explaining,
Right.
and book 1 and 2 are just very, very condensed versions of a lot of various things, which I actually broke down into science, philosophy, religion, and spirituality. These are like the kind of 4 pillars of human wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
And I was, you might laugh at this, but I was always the annoying guy, going to all these classes, seminars. I was always the annoying guy at the back, raising my hand. And
Okay.
every time, every time a lecturer would say something, I would say, "Well, why? Why?" Because after a while, I was starting to realize that a lot of people were actually taught a lot of things and they were passing this knowledge onwards. But not many people actually understood why the world is the way it is,
Mm-hmm.
why we are the way we are.
Mm.
And I wanted to know why. And eventually, I decided to go and research myself. And here we are, 35 years later. I'm talking to you, and I'm still learning, every day.
All right. Okay. Cool. Fantastic. Okay. So you did mention 4 pillars of human wisdom: science, philosophy, religion, and spirituality. What do each of these pillars have to offer us as human beings?
Well, to put it, one of the things, Alex, that happens the longer you research, the more you simplify everything.
Mm-hmm.
So science, I like to say, just deals with facts, with the way it is. It deals with the physical world. Philosophy is very much based on reason.
Mm-hmm.
Where normally philosophy takes over is where a science stops. It's
Mm-hmm.
with more metaphysical stuff like the meaning of life,
Mm-hmm.
what is faith. Science cannot explain those kind of things. It can explain in terms of the processes that go on in the body, for example, how faith manifests, but it won't be able to tell you what is the meaning of faith.
Mm-hmm.
you know Spirituality, I like to say, it's all about personal experience.
Mm-hmm.
It's about going within, deep introspection, and if you go through something like Buddhism, Taoism, Hinduism, you very quickly see that a lot of these, especially Buddhism and Taoism, Buddhism talks about the method,
Mm-hmm.
Taoism talks about the way, and it's a journey. You know, you go within, you experience it, and ultimately you reach your own conclusions. And then obviously you wouldn't be able to examine the wisdom of the world without getting into religion.
Right.
Religion is basically simply it's about faith, and if I studied like various religions, and it's really interesting. You know, Alex, what's especially interesting, what I wanted to specialize in, and what really intrigued me, is looking for synergies, looking for similarities between science, philosophy, religion, and spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
And those are really the fields that truly interest me. And some amazing truths came out of that. For example, how faith creates reality. Similar stuff which I address further on in book 3.
Mm-hmm.
And then in book 4, I get into spirituality, and then in book 5, practical stuff. But yes, it's been an amazing journey, and every day is a new beginning, you know.
Okay. So usually, Joseph, people when they talk about these pillars, they talk about these things like they're separate, like science separate from religion, philosophy separate from spirituality, that sort of thing. Is this really the case, or are there like commonalities among all four of these pillars?
Look, they are all inherently intertwined. As I say, they represent the 4 pillars of human wisdom. As much as we try to maybe knock religion these days, the truth is that religions across the world, you know, it's interesting, came to be at roughly like a similar period in time, which basically suggests that there was this need for humanity to awaken into some new understanding of the world. You know, we had the Abrahamic religions emerging from Israel, you know, starting with the Torah, and then going into the Christianity, and then eventual Islam. We had the rise of Taoism in China, the Buddhism, and the oldest going back to the Vedic scriptures. And then obviously the Greek philosophers. It all happened roughly, you know, in the same period. And they are all, you know, as much as you try to separate them, they are all intertwined. I mean, after all, science came out of the bosom of philosophy, and they are all intertwined with religion at all stages. And perhaps the oldest is spirituality. You could call it spirituality because, again, we're using words to define something that ultimately cannot be described but can only be experienced. And it's interesting how, you know, we started, if you look back, some of the old Vedic scriptures, how we are now in the 21st century searching our way back into the spirituality. Just one thing I wanted to say, which just came to my mind right now, is the sad thing is, you know, if you look at our education, you know, it's all about intellect. We are basically accumulating data. They send us to school, fill us up with data. But really, as I was researching through these various pillars of human wisdom, it was necessarily to start dividing things. So I divided, you know, I was researching who we are, and it was important to, you know, my God, it's such a infinite subject, like, you know. So I divided who we are just for the purpose of investigation into the physical, which is the body, which the science likes to deal with, into the emotional, which is our emotions and feelings, into the intellectual, which is the mind, and into the metaphysical, or the so-called spiritual self. And the really disturbing thing is we are really concentrated on intellect and on logic. And if you look at our dysfunction today, you know, we're doing a bit of body, you know, we're exercising, and a lot of us are taking, like, you know, personal interest in spirituality.
Right.
But we seem to have totally neglected emotional intelligence. I mean, have you noticed that? You know, you have an emotional problem. Okay, there is the psychologist, and there are the pharmaceutical drugs. It's like I mean, it's no coincidence that I believe some 80% of the people in the United States are like on some form of pharmaceutical drugs. You know, we need to really grow holistically. So we desperately need to introduce emotional intelligence at our schools. And because if you just look at our politicians, people like to say, oh, they're just this and that. These are highly intellectual individuals.
All right.
They're not stupid, but what they do lack is emotional intelligence. And as I said before, you cannot think about anything without having accompanying emotions.
Right, right, okay. So in your research, are there any people in this world who have successfully integrated these four pillars within their day-to-day lives, within their culture and their beliefs?
I presume the closest you would get is some spiritual leaders or gurus, whatever you want to call them.
Hmm.
It was only recently, in the last decades, that they started to take more interest as well in the science. Obviously, the science has made such a huge leap forward. But no, I don't. You have some philosophers now, like someone like Sam Harris, no, Jordan Peterson. I mean, Jordan Peterson is a psychologist as well, a very successful psychologist. And I see now the need arising for these people to also know, like, quantum mechanics, know the theory of relativity. They know they're getting very much into philosophy as well, and ultimately including the spiritual concept. So yeah, more and more people are doing that, but I wouldn't say it's something that's like become a mainstream yet.
Right. So the tendency nowadays, of course, is still to keep these pillars separate from each other rather than intertwine, integrate
Um,
them all along.
there are people, yeah, starting to intertwine,
Right,
especially science and philosophy.
right.
Spirituality is still somewhere out there, and
Okay.
obviously religion. There are a lot of scientists who are religious.
Hmm.
If they are not religious, they are very much against religion.
Hmm.
But it is, I believe, as the time goes on, and we rid ourselves of a lot of the factors which are separating us, which is, one of them is definitely religion. Then there is nationality. Now we've got new ones like corporatism, all sorts of groups pretending to be this and that. These are all just, I mean, think about nationality. It's, what is nationality? It's a concept in the head. It's something we invented.
Hmm.
Like go back, 20,000 years, there was no nationality. There was no religion, there was no such separations, in essence, we are human beings, and then we've invented all these concepts which just separate us. And once we manage to break down this concept and basically say, listen, we are like one race, one religion, one nation, I think then it'll also be easier to combine the various wisdom and combine it into something that can really propel us forward into a future where we're designing societies built on prosperity and equality for all, rather than like this constant separation and designation, compartmentalization, and stuff like that.
Okay, okay. So would you say, so as a, I don't know, as one of the pioneers of this, does it mean? What would it look like for the average person if they have humanity as their religion?
Um, well, a lot of the concepts you see these days would disappear, I mean, take, for example, something like money. It's interesting talking to people and they say, oh, how are we going to go to Mars? It's going to cost a lot of money. Yeah.
Right, right.
But I'm saying, what actually is money? Money is an agreement. You and me and 5 billion other people have agreed that this is money and we're going to use it for exchange.
Hmm.
Yeah. There is infinite abundance out there. I mean, just the planet Earth, there is so much abundance. The problem is we are failing to distribute it properly. So what you're basically talking about is imagine if we suddenly start distributing it fairly between all the people. Going to Mars is not a problem. People who design rockets would design rockets. People who produce food would produce food. People who produce medicine would produce medicine.
Right.
The problem is because we've invented things like money. We've invented all sorts of classes. We've invented all sorts of mechanisms that separate us, and all sorts of tools that separate people. Like obviously, at the center of it all stands our ego, and ego is what you call a necessary evil, because what it basically does, it separates us from the world. You see, here is us, the ego, or you call it the false self or the self, and there is the world. And this is the only way that we can actually establish a relationship with everything. When we became aware of being aware, what consciousness necessarily does is causes this separation. So we can actually separate things into here is us and there is the world and there are other beings. But what it also did, it actually brought about, who is aware. So who is aware, it necessarily raises the question of responsibility. And this is where we are right now. I call it the second stage in the evolution of human consciousness. The first was becoming conscious. The second one was becoming aware that we are aware. And the interesting thing, Alex, is now this arrival of technology. Now, what is technology? Technology is basically our way of becoming more efficient. Now, nobody speaks about that. Everybody's talking about the implications of technology, but it's very, very simple. Technology is our way of becoming more efficient. So what we need to do, we're still struggling with responsibility, but really, we should be combining in all our decisions, we should be combining responsibility with efficiency. And let me just say this, I've been thinking about this for years now, and actually what came out of it is a theory of how nature actually teaches us right from wrong. Now you ask experts in morality and ethics, they will tell you there's no objective measure to define right from wrong. What I'm arguing in the book, and I'm actually providing credible information, is that nature basically teaches us right from wrong. So, once we have equality and we know the basic principles towards what is right action, then, we can literally prosper into indefinitely,
All right. Okay. So let me just backtrack a little, Joseph, regarding something that you said earlier on. It's about faith creating reality, something of that sort.
Yes.
Can you explain a little bit on that?
It's a very difficult. It's a very difficult concept, but I'm gonna really try to simplify it, because in book 3, I bring in the science and the philosophy and spirituality to really explain it, particularly science.
Right.
Just let me ask you this. Okay. You could especially take God. People often ask me, does God exist? And I say, well, do you believe in it? And they say, well, I do or I don't.
Right.
And I say, well, do you believe there's a I don't know, a cup circling around the Jupiter? He said, what kind of a stupid thing is that? Well, I said, look, I believe, every morning I get up and I look at myself in the mirror and I go, yeah, nice guy, I'm good, pretty good looking, blah, blah, blah,
Right.
I said, well, does beauty exist, And they said, well, sure, beauty exists. Well, I said, look, I think I'm pretty good looking, Do you think you're pretty good looking? And they go a little bit embarrassed, because it's one of those kind of stupid subjects. And they say, look, beauty is just me and you are creating it. There is, is a flower beautiful? Well, it's only beautiful if it has an observer who decides. We give beauty its beauty, as silly as this sounds. So, I believe beauty exists. I believe a particular girl is beautiful. Is she beautiful? Well, really, I believe this color is green. Is this color green? It's not. I mean, colors don't actually exist, but that's a different matter. Beauty is probably a much better example. Like, just trying to show, beauty does not exist unless you have an intelligent, self-aware observer who basically believes in beauty. I don't know. Have I managed to explain it in a way that makes sense?
Okay. What I'm getting here, just to confirm, what I'm getting here is that beauty is essentially what we call beauty is essentially a label that we create based on certain values that we have.
Beliefs. Yeah, exactly. We are creating it. It's our conviction of reality that's creating it. You see,
Mhm.
just very briefly, all truth arises essentially from within. We are creating it. So this makes reality pretty much relative. Um, I got a bit entangled here, and I forgot what I'm trying to say. But the essence of what I'm trying to say is, uh, without an intelligent being basically, perceiving something as beautiful,
Mhm.
the universe just simply is as it is. These are all laws that we created.
Mhm.
Without these laws and without intelligent, self-aware beings, the world just simply is as it is. I mean, and this actually brings us back then to the whole question of why the ultimate dilemma, which I believe is why is there something rather than nothing? But it's just, again, you could write books about that.
Right.
I include it in the series of these books, and basically build my theories out of this question: why is there something rather than nothing? And eventually, you come to things like faith and how we create our reality.
Mhm.
So the crazy thing is, when you think about it and look at it from the other point, did God create us, or I ask in the book, perhaps we are creating God?
Mhm. Okay.
Which way is it?
Yeah. Yeah. And I thought, and then actually, while you're speaking, a thought just occurred to me because we've got a couple of cats here, and that just made me realize most likely, I mean, cats have no sense of what we would call beauty or the concepts that we have. Their experience of life
Yeah.
would be very different compared to the human
Yes.
experience.
Actually, you mentioned cats, dogs, snakes. They don't see colors. They see colors very differently than we do.
Yes.
We are so convinced that what we're seeing is reality. When a lot of us agree on certain thing, on certain truth, we call it reality. And I normally say, but ask your cat. The
Right.
cat, if it could speak, it would say, "What are you talking about?"
Right.
I don't see a yellow shirt.
Right. Right. And just on senses alone, I mean, cats don't taste sweet, so they'd be wondering what the heck sweet is.
Exactly. So automatically they are creating a different reality, and as a result, their feelings, convictions, whatever convictions they have, are very much different to our convictions. I
Right.
would guess.
Yeah, definitely their reality would be shaped by their senses, by what they
Yes,
perceive,
yes,
right? Okay.
absolutely, yeah.
Right.
And when you start thinking about these things, you suddenly realize, because we just love to go around and say, "Oh, this is true," "Oh, this guy was wrong," what he's talking about. Once you start to understand these things, you just think, wow,
Right.
suddenly a world of infinite possibilities opens up. And these infinite possibilities are basically coming from within us. We are literally beings of infinite potential. And the series of 5 books is basically about how to release this infinite potential to create the world of sheer abundance. Because, what we're doing with it right now, yes, we have fantastic lives, but it could be just, a lot of people are still suffering very unnecessarily.
Right.
It's just good to bring this information out to everybody and unleash this infinite potential from within.
Right. Right. Okay. Yeah, right. Yeah, definitely something there. Definitely.
Yes.
So, Joseph, let's say you came across someone who's caught up in the rat race or is frustrated in life, definitely feels that there's something missing in his or her life, and you had only enough time to tell that person one thing about that kind of experience. What would be that one thing you
Yes.
tell them?
In simple words, all truth arises from within. Let's say you see a color green. I mean, the light hits the retina of your eyes. it gets converted into a chemical signal, travels to your brain, and you see the world. So you basically co-creating it. But to go back into your question, we're basically saying, well, who's feeling miserable? Who's having, I don't know, somebody is suffering because of this. Who is suffering? You are suffering, So surely if the world arises from within you and you are co-creating it and you are the one who's feeling miserable, you are the one who's experiencing misfortune, surely the most important thing in the whole wide world for you, it should be to know who you are. Because, Alex, amazing as it is, I mean, try this out, or maybe after the interview, ask anybody, who are you? They will tell you, they will tell you the name. I said, but no, that's your name. Who are you? Who are you? People spend most of the time, doing crazy things, but anything but to understand who they are. And the whole world arises from this knowledge.
Right.
Or ignorance who they are. So I'm saying, learn about the self. And, it was the first wisdom that we still have written records about is spirituality. Spirituality is basically experiencing the self, going within and learning about the self.
Okay.
The most important thing we should all do.
Right, definitely. I mean, we've got to know who we are. We don't even know who we are.
No, ask anybody, honestly.
Yeah.
Very, very few people will be able to tell you who they are.
Right. Okay.
As crazy as it seems, they'll be able to tell you, whether, some sports results or God knows what, but not who they are.
Right. Okay. So, Joseph, in the last minutes or so of this interview, are there any last words of wisdom you would like to share to maybe inspire some of our listeners?
Well, can we make this a bit of fun?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah,
Shoot.
let's imagine the world as a network of relationships.
Okay.
In fact, everything we do, you're speaking to me, what we're basically doing, we're establishing a relationship. You're looking at your computer, there is you, there's the computer, you're basically establishing a relationship.
All right.
So everything is about relationships. And, I was lucky at age 18, I met two really amazing guys. One was Jim Rohn, who was the mentor to Anthony Robbins, the very famous American motivator. The second one was Larry Thompson. He's like a legend in the marketing, network marketing. And Larry asked me, said, well, who do you want to be? And I said, well, I want to be successful, And he says, Joe, well, all you have to realize is that what stands between you and success is your communication, So everything is about relationships, and the success of your relationships depends on your communication. And I thought, wow, communication. Okay, I'm gonna get really good at this communication. Then I started looking at it, and I thought, my God, there is, I don't know, verbal communication,
Right.
The way we talk, we communicate, the way we walk, the way we shake hands. There is emotional communication. And I thought, my God, this is such a huge subject. No way I'm going to learn this in a year.
Right.
But let's just take, for example, Alex, let's take our verbal communication. Yeah, we've invented these huge words. And as I said before, words are just pointers. But let's take stuff like life, or, I don't know, love, or truth, or freedom. And if you have the time, I would like to just very, very quickly look at these words. This is really fun. It is, at least for me anyway.
Okay.
Let's take something like life. What is life? Life, I actually call what people call life, I call living, because people like to say, oh, it's all the matter of life and death. And I'm saying, it's not. It's about the matter of birth and death. And what happens in between is living. Right. Now, living is a manifestation of life. Let's put life aside, because life is such a huge word. We don't even know how life came to be. So let's leave life aside. I discuss it in the book, but here, let's talk about living. What is living? Take something simple. What is living? And I ask people this, and no one, they just give me funny looks. I said, look, living is basically the time you have been given on this planet. It's the time, So for all those people out there who are working for money, I would like to say, well, actually, what you're working for is to improve the quality of your time you've been given. So when you go home after work at night and you spend your money on silly things like, I don't know, putting sugar into your coffee, you're not wasting your money. What you're actually wasting is time, because that's all we have. We have a certain amount of time, and everything we do is basically to improve the quality of time we spend with the people we love, to do the things we love to do and stuff like that. And I'm going to leave it at that. So let's take something like, what was the next? Love. Love is, everybody's talking about love. I mean, admit it. I mean, like, wherever you go, people say this is love, that is love.
Right.
I mean, just before we start debating love, we have to necessarily divide it into two segments. One is I call it earthly love, something we talk about here on planet Earth. And then there's something we call true love. Now, earthly love, very, very simply, is something we do, huge difference, while the true love, it's something that we are. Again, I'm not no time to explain it here, but just something for people to deliberate. So,
Right.
earthly love, something we do. True love, something we are. Then you have words like truth. As I was saying before, truth is relative to the observer. It comes from within. So, because people like to say, "Oh, that is true," and that is true. Well, we are co-creating it. Once you realize that, suddenly you will have to see the world differently, because truth cannot happen. Again, the world is as it is. Nature doesn't go around saying this is true, that is true.
Right.
There are just the laws of nature. That's the way it is. They are immutable. And everything else is our own versions of truth. Yeah? Again, let's leave it at that. Maybe we have time for one more, which is freedom. I love this one because, it's everybody's talking about freedom. We want more freedom. We want democracy. Ask anybody what is freedom. They will tell you the most amazing things. Freedom, a basic definition of freedom is the right to do what one wants. But straight away you think, hang on, the right to do what one wants is like, in an organized society, you would have just anarchy, chaos.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So we're not really searching for freedom. What we're searching for is something I call inner liberation. Now, what is inner liberation? Inner liberation is, you're going to have to meditate on this one a little bit. But inner liberation is the freedom to always be able to do what is right. Yeah, imagine that you are so free that whatever you do, you always do the right thing.
Right.
That is true liberation.
Okay.
And there is one more thing. If we have the time, just a really funny thing I like to say, which is, and I have to get you involved here. It's my favorite question to the people, and I say, there is only one certainty in the world, and that is that we're all going to
die.
Yeah, people keep saying that. It drives me up the wall. No, there is only one certainty in the world. Look, look at it scientifically, philosophically, religiously, spiritually. There is only one certainty in the world, and that is that we are all going to change. Change is the only one certainty in the world. From change actually comes reality. I mean, think about it. No change, no reality. Try and imagine a static universe.
Right.
Well, we can't because we're thinking about it and already change is happening.
Right.
So change is the only certainty in our space and time dependent universe. Now look how this works out. When change is acute, we call it transformation. And in biological beings, all change we comprehend as aging. But really aging, there is no such thing as aging. We invented it. We invented this word. All that's really happening is change and transformation. Now something really beautiful comes out of this, and perhaps we can leave our listeners with that.
All right.
Okay? Yeah, listen to this. Yeah?
Okay.
If the only certainty is change, this means, and we comprehend it as aging, this means aging is inevitable. Getting old is a choice, and death is a transformation into the unknown. So aging is inevitable. Getting old is a choice. I'm 51. I'm in better condition than I was at 25. I don't know. Everybody keeps going around, saying, you're getting old. I said, who's getting old? I'm
Right,
51 years young.
right,
And death, you notice all these people talking about death, and they're all still alive, And I'm saying,
right,
well, nobody knows more on death about death than anybody else. So all death is just a transformation into the unknown. And this is the honest truth, what I've just said, but we just tend to corrupt our truths, and we come up with most amazing, ugly theories like dying. And who wants to die?
right.
I, I'll settle for the transformation into the unknown.
Okay, got that. Cool. Okay, Joseph, I wish we could speak more, but we're kind of out of time here. So, you
Thank
know,
you so much.
in closing, then, the book is The Unfinished Book About Who We Are, Book One, First Steps to Self-Discovery. The authors are guest Joseph Reid, and you can find his book on Amazon. So, Joseph, thank you very much for that interesting discussion. Thank you very much for being an author story. It was a real blast having you on.
Thank you so much, Alex. I'm sorry, I've just we gave you so much information, all mixed up, but hopefully, someone out there will be able to make some sense out of it.
Yeah, well, for those of you who want to make sense out of it, find a better way to make sense of it, go ahead and check out his book, The Unfinished Book About Who We Are. And of course, by all means, feel free to go ahead and subscribe to our channel to listen to the other interesting topics we've covered in the past and which we will cover in the future. So see you guys next episode on Author Story.